Welcome. My name's Brian Southwick. I'm a choral music ed student at UVU, and today I'll be interviewing Dr. Christopher Ramos, who is a conductor, educator, and performer based out of the Mountain West. Dr. Ramos currently is serving as the director of bands and assistant professor of music at Utah Valley University here in Orem, Utah. He conducts the UVU Wind Symphony and directs instrumental studies within music education area. Today, we'll be diving into some of his experiences while working as a teacher in Malaysia prior to coming to UVU. To get us started, Dr. Ramos, why don't you tell us about your experience in Malaysia, how you came to work there, and what your role was as a teacher?
I was a band director at Dalat International School on the island of Penang, Malaysia. It's about 4 hours north of Kuala Lumpur, 2 hours south of the Thailand border. I got that job because I was finishing my master's degree in wind conducting and was looking for jobs. And that one looked really interesting to both my wife and myself. We applied, got it, moved over there.
Did you have other offers in the States?
I did not. A job opening came up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, that my teacher really wanted me to get. So I applied for it, decided I was going to graduate, and the school actually lost my application. And I got really frustrated. I started looking literally all over the world.
That's so exciting.
And this was actually really early in the job hunt process. This was probably like January, February. So I should not, in retrospect, I should not have been so frustrated. But because I was looking so early, international schools tend to hire starting in November, December, January, because it takes so long to get a visa. I was late to the game applying because they hadn't found a band director yet. So it all just kind of worked out.
What was your mindset going into the possibility of working internationally? I think a lot of people wouldn't even consider that.
Yeah. For my wife and me, at the time, we had no kids. We were relatively newly married, and we were really interested in anything, like literally anything. My wife, actually, when we first met, she'd mentioned that she'd always wanted to live overseas and be a missionary overseas. She worked for a while in New York City, working with people groups from all over the world, and just fell in love with like the global community there. So when this opportunity came open to work overseas in a faith-based school, it was kind of a natural choice for us.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing. As you were there, what were some of the difficulties transitioning into a new culture? And maybe even point us a little bit towards the music side and the education side of what were those differences?
This goes back to, like, in seminar, the discussion about the postures that you can have entering a new place.
Right. Here, Dr. Ramos is referencing a conversation that we had in one of our classes where he presented to us the idea called entry posture model. The idea behind this entry posture model is that all of us in our life are going to face new experiences. And we have two options for how we can approach the differences that we'll face. Either a posture of humility or a posture of defense. One is we can face it with openness, trust, and acceptance, or instead with suspicion, fear, and prejudice. Regardless of which one of these options we choose, we'll inevitably face frustration, confusion, embarrassment, and tension in this new situation. But we do have a choice from there about what to do with that. Those who choose openness, trust, and acceptance are more likely to then choose to observe, listen, and inquire, and eventually develop a positive rapport and understanding with those around them. Those who choose suspicion, fear, and prejudice are more likely to choose criticism, rationalizing, and withdrawal, which will inevitably lead them to alienation and isolation.
You can have a posture of defense or a posture of humility. And this is probably the largest challenge, also the most growing that I did, moving into a new culture. Malaysia has a public education system, and they have a private education system that's mostly made up of international schools, mostly British-style international schools. But because Malaysia is a former British colony, there's a strong relationship with the UK, and a lot of people will move through that education system, go do their higher education studies in the UK, and then come back to Malaysia and work.
Interesting.
As doctors, lawyers, what have you. Right now, there are only 3 American-style international schools in the whole country,
Okay.
and I worked at one of them. The idea was that those families who had an interest in studying in college in the United States, they would send their kids to an American-style international school. One in KL, one at the southern border, and one at the northern border where we were. I say this to say that the public school system is free, but the international school system is not free. And that's a huge barrier to access for a lot of students in Malaysia. However, it is not as big of an economic barrier there as it is here. So international schools there are much cheaper to attend than a private school in the United States. Generally.
Cheaper on a numerical level or cheaper on an economic level?
Both.
Okay.
So
it's more approachable.
It is more approachable. It is still expensive. And so there's still an access issue.
Okay.
But it is cheaper for a Malaysian to go to an international school in Malaysia than it is for an American to go to a private school here.
What is an international school?
It's a private school with an international focus. So they're going to be bringing in teachers from all over the world. So you have teachers maybe from South Africa, and then you're going to go have a teacher from America, and then a teacher from Canada. So Malaysia specifically is an interesting place because there are people who come from all over the world to live there and do business there. And this idea of the melting pot is like foundational to Malaysian culture. There's 3 main people groups. There's the Malaysian, there's Chinese Malaysian, and there's Indian Malaysian. And then there's something they call Lang Lang, which means other.
That was you.
That was me.
You were the Lang Lang.
So the Malay, to be part of the Malay, you have to be Muslim. You don't have a choice. Like the religion and ethnicity are closely tied at a country. Also, to be Malay came with special privileges. They see themselves as the original people. So they won't go so far to call themselves indigenous, but they say we've been here the longest, so we deserve the most privileges. Even though there's like a people group called the original people, the indigenous people, who were there, have been there much longer.
Interesting.
And it's actually very similar to the issues we have with indigenous peoples here in North America. Anyway, so there's the Malay, which comes with special privileges, but it also comes with certain restrictions, such as you have to be Muslim.
Okay.
Then there's the Chinese Malaysians. They came to Malaysia in the 1800s as traders, essentially, but they settled, and it's a very large people group, and they still have strong ties to China. And then there's the Indian Malaysians who were brought over by the British as labor.
Oh, as paid labor or slave labor?
Paid labor, but not paid
parallel conditions.
Yeah. So there's a very large Indian community as well. All this to say that Malaysia has always had kind of this international focus, that it has strong ties to British colonialism
as well. Are there many British or white people living there?
Yes. Mostly British, some Australian, some American.
But they fit into the other category.
Okay. Which would be small. It's not a huge percent of the population. But what's interesting about Malaysia is because you have 3 main and hugely different people groups, Malay, Chinese, and Indian, they all speak their own language.
Wow.
They all have their own cultural histories. They all have their own religions. So what ends up happening is English becomes the trade language for the entire country. Everybody speaks English kind of well. And there's been a huge push to push Bahasa Malaysia as the official language of Malaysia. But while the Malay may speak Bahasa, the Chinese are like, well, I'm Chinese. I don't speak Bahasa. That's not the language of my people. I want to speak Mandarin, or I want to speak, whatever the local dialect is.
Oh, yeah.
So there's these issues that come up culturally because of that. The international school fills like a need in that population because the instruction happens in English. It prepares you to study in the UK or in the United States.
Almost neutral ground to say
exactly.
It's 3 groups, but we can all agree that it's good to learn English.
Right.
It'll be successful in the world.
Right. And I would say that the education systems of the UK and the United States are held in very high esteem in Malaysia. Just being an American teacher comes with a certain amount of cultural prestige that people really respect.
I'm interested to know, as a teacher, do you ever encounter language barriers with your students? And how did you differentiate teaching to accommodate that.
I experienced plenty of language barriers all the time. At my school, it was probably half local students, half students from all over the world. Now, those students from all over the world are literally from all over the world. So they're all speaking their own languages plus English. And then my half students who were from Malaysia, most of them were Chinese Malaysian. A minority were Indian Malaysian, and a very small minority were Malay Malaysian. The other languages spoken on our campus were Chinese, Korean, Tamil from India. Those are the three main other languages that people spoke. And however, we had a rule on campus that's pretty typical of international schools that I've always felt very weird about, and I don't know how I feel about it still, that when on campus, you may only speak English. So the spirit behind this rule was community and to build community. And so if English is going to be our only common language, then by speaking Korean with your friends, you're potentially ostracizing somebody who speaks Chinese or speaks only English.
Right. That's interesting because I think a lot of teachers see that type of segregation in our public schools here, even in Utah, and sometimes feel uncomfortable and wish that there was a deeper sense of integration with that.
Yeah. It was an interesting rule that was enforced. We had other rules similar to like everybody had to wear a uniform, but also it meant that I held certain privileges as somebody who speaks English really well, right? But I will also say that this was a rule that was not actually instituted by teachers or administration. This was a rule that came from the board, which is made up of parents of all of these different people.
Interesting.
So it was a community built.
Yeah.
And that's probably why it worked.
That makes sense.
That being said, we had a very strong ESL curriculum from that started in preschool, went all the way through middle school. But then you had a barrier. When you graduated middle school, you had to have a certain proficiency of English in order to participate in the high school. Most students would pass, but we had a couple who would not. And then they would have to go talk to us somewhere else. If you transferred in, you would have to take an exam and pass that exam. If you transferred in at high school. Elementary through middle school, you could transfer in, do the ESL program, which was kind of an addition to your regular studies, so that hopefully you'd be prepared for high school. And the reasoning behind that was because in high school, you're taking AP courses, you're doing all this really advanced stuff. And our students were graduating and like going to the Ivy Leagues. So the academic pressure there is really high. So you had to have a certain fluency in English in order to do that. Teaching in both the middle school and the high school, I ran into plenty of issues teaching in English where my students would not understand what I was saying. I feel like that's one strength of teaching music, is that I can solve musical problems with musical language, right? So when in doubt, model it for your students as they can do it, right?
Yes. If we can teach entire silent lessons, surely we can instruct to someone who doesn't speak English.
Yeah. And so I experienced a lot of success that way. And that was one way that I trained myself to speak less in instruction and do more music, was because I would say something, I would watch it go right over my student's head and be like, okay, so this isn't working.
I need to find a different way to communicate.
The other way that this would come into play maybe more often as an issue is just dealing with like colloquialisms. Nobody understands what it means if I say it's raining cats and dogs. Also, a big one that I had to learn very quickly is to completely stop using sarcasm in my teaching, which was a big piece of my teaching prior to that, because that's so strong here in the United States. And we understand sarcasm as humor here. It's not taken that way, at least not in Southeast Asia.
What's an example of that kind of sarcastic comment that you learned to avoid?
A sarcastic comment like, well, that sounded horrible, right? To my American student would laugh, but to my Chinese student would be like, I'm a horrible person.
Yeah,
right.
I don't think that is both a joke and feedback. Whereas for them, the joke is lost. It's just horrific feedback.
Yes, exactly. And so my feedback would change from that was horrible to that the end of that note was ragged, right? As an ensemble. It just needed to be really specific and like musically content focused.
But once again, a powerful lesson to learn that makes you better educators.
And I only learned it because a colleague came up to me after observing me teaching and was like, hey, you should know that these comments affect these students these ways. And I had one student who was willing to talk to me about it, a middle school student. I'm actually really proud of him and really thankful that he was willing to be honest with me. He was like, oh yeah, that makes us feel awful.
Wow.
And I was like, oh. So that was a big learning moment. I did that, like that was within my first semester of teaching.
All of us, I think, dread being, in some ways, a first-year teacher as much as we look forward to it.
Yeah.
And just the overwhelm that's ahead. Yeah, was this your first year?
Yeah.
Teaching a school?
Yeah.
You went straight from your undergrad to a master's and then from here.
Exactly.
So you student taught, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But this is your own class, totally different game.
Right.
And it's in a different country.
Right.
What was the emotional toll for you that first semester or that first year?
Oh, it was intense. It was intense.
What's a lesson that you learned in that first year of teaching that you would offer up to first year teachers, whether they're teaching here in the United States or in a foreign country?
In seeking my first job, whether it was here or somewhere else, I was really intent on making sure that I had access to at least one mentor. And I was very lucky in this job that there was a second band director who had already been teaching there for a few years and also had like 20 years of public school teaching experience in New York. He was just an extremely skilled, knowledgeable person.
Makes all the difference.
Who could, it made all the difference. He showed me the ropes. He let me fall on my face a few times and then we would debrief afterward. But he would never let me fall on my face in a way that was going to hurt people or destroy the band program. He let me make poor programming decisions.
Right.
Yeah, you should not have programmed that.
You see why?
Yeah. But I wouldn't have learned that had I not gone through it. And they weren't complete catastrophes or disasters or anything like that.
But he knew it beforehand.
Oh yeah, he knew it.
And didn't say it.
Yeah. I slowly learned to pick up on his cues. Like he would give cues when I would say, I'm thinking about this piece. Like he would grunt or do certain things that it was like, oh wait, that's Andrew telling me, maybe not. But he wouldn't tell me what to do. Yeah. So he was just a really great mentor. And what's the takeaway? Find somebody who's able to do that for you.
How do we do that when most of us are going into a single faculty position in public schools?
So the difference here in Utah, yes, you might be the only choral person in your school, but there are other choral folks within driving distance, right?
Right.
The problem with teaching in international schools is that sometimes not only are you the only music person, but you're the only music person for like thousands of miles.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And that's a situation I didn't want to be in. And I had colleagues in that situation. Like I had one colleague who was teaching in Mauritius and was the only, and just got burned out, right? Like didn't know how to handle it and left eventually. So you got to have a support network. And so here you have colleagues who are willing and eager to help you out, even if they're not in the same school building as you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just reaching out.
Oh yeah, you have to reach out.
People within your district.
Find somebody that you respect, that you trust, that is doing the kind of stuff that you want to be doing 10 years from where you are.
Not necessarily on a college professor level. We've kind of maybe learned what we need to from our professors.
Right.
It's time to get a colleague.
Oh yeah.
Someone who's got no experience.
Absolutely.
All right. That's great advice. Given the subject of the class that this podcast is for, was there anything notable about the technology, accessibility, and the way you integrated technology into your classes?
Yes. Our school was pretty well off technology-wise. For example, you could go to the international school down the street. It's like they have a smart board in every room. We only had smart boards in our elementary school. Right. Our tuition was lower, so we didn't have as many resources. It also meant that our salary wasn't as good as my colleagues down the street.
What was the accessibility of technology in the hall for homework and stuff like that? Because
of the wealth of the student population, there was plenty of access to technology. Also, Malaysia is, yes, it's a developing country, but everybody has a laptop. Everybody has a smartphone. It's not like we don't have access to digital technologies in our country.
My experience in Mexico was that technology was not the thing that lagged behind.
Right.
In areas that seem to be developing.
Yeah.
They may not have, a car.
Right.
But they all have a TV.
And I think that's because, compare the cost of a smartphone to the cost of a car.
and the need for it.
Right. So in the high school, it was one-to-one devices. Everybody had to have a computer, and the school didn't provide it. So that was sometimes an issue.
Oh, interesting.
In the middle school and in the elementary school, we had one-to-one iPads at the time that were provided by the school,
Okay.
but students were not allowed to take them home.
Yeah.
How did that come to bear for me? We didn't have Canvas. We used Moodle, and I used it for all of my assessments. I used it for distributing recordings and general communication with students. It was huge because for a student who didn't feel comfortable feeling fluent in English, for example,
Right.
they could at least navigate Moodle and submit their test. Right.
Okay.
So it was a way to increase access in that way for the students.
Were the instructions via technology translatable? They're not
Oh,
allowed
yeah.
to speak English, but at home
Yeah.
they can translate this and read it.
Yeah. Well, I had one student played trumpet. She was Japanese. She didn't speak English very well, but she's a fabulous musician. I often gave the students an option of coming to do their playing tests for me in person, or you could submit it on Moodle.
Yeah.
She would never come and perform her stuff for me. Not because she couldn't do it, but because she was scared of the little private lesson that would come along with it. Right? Because she was scared of interacting in English.
Interesting.
But she could submit her playing test to me as long as it didn't involve that back and forth on English, right?
Yeah.
So in a much more comfortable way. Did that mean that I never, that I just never interacted with her? No. But it just lowered the stakes a little bit for her on those big assessments.
Like that. Yeah, that seems like a valuable use of technology to be able
Yeah.
to reach other languages.
I will say too, we introduced while I was there live streaming our concerts, which was a huge deal for our students who had families living in other countries. I got there, we got a new hall. There was talk about setting up a live stream capability. It was expensive. I was like, I think we should do it. And we did it. And then the feedback came in from families. And then my principal came to me and was like, I'm glad you pushed for that.
That's awesome.
Because that has changed the game for us.
Do you encourage people within the States to do live stream, that kind of thing?
So
you think that's something that you need to do more carefully?
Your district or your school, usually district, can buy what they call a mechanical license. That would allow you to live stream.
Interesting.
We don't actually have that in the Norda Center, which is why we don't live stream. But it's as simple as budgeting for those mechanical rights.
Interesting. Fascinating. What would you offer as a final piece of advice or a lesson that you've learned about education in another culture?
In my doctoral degree, in a music history pedagogy class, we read this chapter called Our Students Are Not Like Us, which was a really helpful thing to read even just a few years ago, post teaching overseas, because I was reminded that teaching overseas is really salient immediately. Your students aren't like you. They don't think like you. Culturally, we have no idea what they're going through at home. The concept of honor and shame, or the concept of even what a smile means. A smile means something different in Southeast Asia than it does here.
Yeah, we experienced that. Or in China.
Yeah. Being constantly reminded that your students don't think like you forces you to approach teaching a certain way. I think in a very empathetic, probably more fair way. And of course, we always grow in this. Like, we're not all good at it immediately, and there's always room to get better at it. The transition moving overseas was hard, but the transition moving back to the States was just as hard. Because now you're in a place that you would say is home, a place that you feel like you're supposed to know. And yet, really, it's all the same problems.
Wow.
Like when I use sarcasm with my students, a lot of them probably get it. And there are probably a few that don't.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's something I learned overseas that is directly applicable here, that my students aren't like me. They're growing up in a different time with different cultural norms in a different technological age. They don't have the same life experience that I have, nor will they ever have the same life experience that I have. And that is true for every generation, from generation to generation. So just constantly thinking, my students are not like me. They learn differently. They're different people. They have different dreams and aspirations. So what does that mean for my curriculum, for my approach to instruction? I think that's a good question to keep at the front of our minds.
I love that. That's a great takeaway.
Yeah, I think specifically speaking musically, all of us music people are weirdos in terms of society,
Right.
right? Like the kids in your choir, most of them are not going to become music majors.
Correct. Yeah.
A couple of them will. And those students will be more like you than the others are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just keeping that in mind, like we are teaching people who are not interested in studying music for a career. That means that we have to approach our teaching a little bit differently than how we would teach ourselves, if that makes sense, or than how our college professors taught us.
Critical. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yes, absolutely.